let me explain some drawing techniques to capture a real sense of realism in a streetscape. So this is a wonderful scene in Zurich. The first thing we really want to do is to put a sense of depth. Unless we're looking at a solid wall or parallel to us, streetscapes do invariably have a wonderful sense of movement through down streets and around corners, closer things, furthest things. So analyze firstly what's the closest thing, and it's this building on the right hand side. This is actually a bridge, and this building is on our side of the bridge. And if we look across the road, we can see the bridge goes across to this wonderful cathedral on the other side. Now you're watching this at 4 times drawing speed because it took over an hour to draw in real life. I'm using a 0.3mm pen at the moment, the heaviest or the widest width pen that I use, to help give this closest drawing a more substantial, a more solid feel because of the additional ink that's flowing to create it, to capture it. And that means it's going to feel darker and bolder and stronger, and all of that will help it to feel closer to us. I'm also going to add more detail as much as I can with a view of this angle, because that detail is also something that tells us this is closer to us. It's really important I spend a little more time on this because I will measure a lot of other things from this. This is becoming a bit of a ruler for what I'm doing. And you'll see I'm doing a lot of alignment. I put lots of dots on the paper as I draw to help me work out, am I estimating these heights, these widths correctly before I make the commitment of drawing a line, because a dot standing by itself in the wrong place is much easier to hide than a line standing by itself in the wrong place. Now, the other important thing to do for realism is to make sure our angles are as accurate as we can get them. Our perspective angles and any other angles. So because the ground here isn't quite level, because the road is sloping up, I need to just pay attention to what I'm looking at and to draw that. Now, people are an important part of most streetscapes. It's really important we get their scale correct. And what I did was I looked at this to see this closest figure, to align him, I think it is, with the various elements of the building that I've already drawn. And then the other figures, I'm aligning them with this first figure. I'm still using my 0.3mm pen because these are closer. Now these little dormers, I'm aligning them firstly in the reference with what's under them to make sure I put them in the right place. And then I draw them in once I've checked the photo and then looked at what I've drawn to line them up in the same place. Now notice that a few of my lines there on that bridge surround there weren't quite accurate. I didn't let that stop me putting the more correct ones in. So having established these very closest elements, I can now draw some things behind them that in effect visually disappear behind them. So I needed to capture those front things first. So now I'm using a 0.2mm pen, and this pen is a little bit, it's not a very full pen, so it has a bit of a patchy line, which suits me well because I want this to feel some distance away. So I'm drawing these lines pretty quickly and trying to get a fairly light feel. I'm really establishing the framework, the perspective framework. This cathedral church is a very box-like structure. Notice that I've done a bit of a dotted outline to preserve the space for that tree. That tree is pretty important because it's a very contrasting object, texture, and it will be a contrasting value because it is mostly very dark. But again, I'm having to work hard at my angles, work hard to get those angles correct. Now remember, with perspective, as you go above eye level, the angles will increase slightly as they rise. And that's what I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing. I don't want these lines to be just parallel, these angles. I want them to actually tilt up more and more as they get higher. So you can see there's bits of adjustment there. And I'm still pushing up trying to get these boxes before I worry too much about the detail. There's no point putting detail onto a shape or a form that's out of proportion. And now I have this spire. Now I'm aligning this with that building on the right that I've drawn, and now I'm working out how high does it go in relation to the tower on my reference. Now where's that point in my drawing since I've already drawn the tower? Would have been a mistake to have drawn that very thin spire in first, because I wouldn't have had the reference point. So working out the best order to draw things is so important. Now doing a bit of the detail on the lower part of this church, still using the 0.2. It's important to capture the feel of the detail with this pen. We're not going to be able to draw everything we see, but we want to do enough, at least in the most visually prominent, dominant parts, that it looks that way. Still correcting any angles that I feel aren't quite right as I go. But keeping these details nice and brisk, fairly loose in my mark making. Once I start using marks that are very precise, then the expectation of the precision of the details rises and invariably goes beyond my ability to be able to do it. So by keeping my mark making a little bit on the casual side, it allows some pullback from having to be too precise with the details that still works for the overall appearance of the drawing. So now I'm doing these arched windows that are set back, and it's getting that sense of being set back, getting that sense of depth, several indents going back is quite an important part of this. In some ways it's a fairly plain facade, but these details of these setback windows is fairly significant. So I want to make sure I get those. So working out what I'm doing now, still with my 0.2. I'm trying to work out where these details come. Can I fit them all in, or do I need to let some of them slip past behind this building? And I think I've worked out that I don't have quite enough space here, and that's okay. What I'll do is the bit that we can see, I'll keep those proportions as they need to be with that corner tower. And so some of the details will be hidden behind the lamp in my drawing that we can actually see more clearly in my photo. And it's the same as these details above align up with what's below. And these little, almost like they're vents more than windows, I think. I'm not sure if they're to let hot air out or to let light into the roof cavity. So now a little bit of tentative mark making to get a feel, is this right? And now with these angles, I'm checking these angles with the angles below, with the reference angles. They need to keep getting higher. And then how high is the top going to be? Again, there's a bit of detail there. Notice how I did that. I drew these in segments rather than trying to draw the outside shape and then do the segments secondly. I actually did the segments to create the shape. And I find sometimes that's a much more accurate way, that I get a better result that way. There's no rule. Sometimes one way works better for a given drawing than another. It's simply being alert to the options of how we draw some structures. And there you have it again. So just popping a little bit of detail on, trying to keep my pen nice and light, adjusting the angles. And now I come down to the foreground, really important. And this is often a very neglected part, and yet it's important for so many ways. So firstly, these these lamps, really important sense of perspective. They need to follow a perspective angle. I need to make sure I capture it. I need to make sure that they get either larger or smaller at the right rate. And with the people who we can see in here as well, I need to make sure that I keep all of those in scale. I don't know if you noticed, but I began to draw a figure in the wrong spot, and I just disguised them into the front of the cathedral. It's always important not to worry too much about things that aren't quite right. As we do them, we can usually make it less of a big deal one way or another before the end. We are creators, so that's one of the things we get to do. Now, what's a little bit tricky here is that the ground isn't level, so we really have to pay attention. And these sorts of foreshortened irregular curves that we see with the gutter in, that's sort of in the centre, for the pavement that's on the right, we need to pay particular attention that we create the same shapes that we have on the roadway to help guide us to get the correct angle. And I'm paying really attention, I'm paying a great deal of attention here with these additional figures, lining them up with the figures I've already drawn. So all of these figures and the guy on the bike are all being lined up with that first closest figure. And now just doing that, I'm still using the 0.2 though. Now working a little more, I think, on the tree. Now I want to make this value for the tree really quite dark because it is very dark in the reference. It's probably the darkest value pretty much if we were to turn this into a black and white drawing. But I don't want to make it too black. I don't want to colour it black because then it will come forwards too much. It is at the very back of the foreground, or it's at the very front of the midground. It's in a bit of a tricky spot. So I don't want to let it get too dark or it will come forward too much and not feel that it's sitting in the right spot over the bridge. And it also needs to read properly with that first building I drew there on the right. So now there's another building on the left that we can just see a little bit of, and then we have some buildings that are, well, a building that's quite a bit further back, and I've now switched from the 0.2 to a 0.1. There is a bit of a tree that peeks out from the far side of the cathedral, and now there's this building which I'm doing my best to draw with a lighter feel, a lighter touch, and it is a thinner pen, so that should help me. But sometimes it is made trickier if a pen is full or only partly full of ink. But I'm trying to certainly make this building feel like it's further away than the other things that we're seeing. And not overdrawing the detail is another way we can do that. So now I'm doing some dots to help me position this curve. So I'm checking the curve both with the cathedral elements to see where that actual corner is. That actual corner is sort of in the middle of the cathedral on the road. And you saw I put some positioning dots, and now I have some cobblestones to create just a very brief, a very quick sense of the effect of the cobblestones. I don't want to draw lots of cobblestones because then that will draw the eye in a way that doesn't happen in the reference. But I do want to give a feeling that there are cobblestones there. Wonderful example of drawing the effect of detail. Adding a little bit of shade into the front of this distant wall, I think helps separate it from what's around it. And it did have some shade on it there. Otherwise, we're pretty much done. What do you think? Please hit the like button if you found this demo helpful. I'll post this reference photo on my post page. Why not have a go drawing it yourself? So, otherwise, a nice little scene in Zurich and a great example of a streetscape to capture the elements that we need for it to feel like it's real. G'day, I'm Travers. Hope you had fun with this, hope it's been helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.